Ah, the Carolina Hurricanes. Always a ton of fun. Welcome to Scouching's 2024 Prospect Pyramid Recap video series. What we do here is we're looking at every individual NHL team, their overall prospect pyramids, and just taking an overall umbrella look at what the situation looks like. And just to be clear before we get into it, the definition of a prospect for me is players within 5 years of their first year of draft eligibility who have not been on an NHL roster for more than a season. And the way the tiers are going to break down is this. At the very top, you've got franchise, which in a sense are players you never ever trade and you keep them as long as you possibly can. Core are players that could be really high in your lineup and you would really not like to have to move them unless you really have to. Depth is a much broader category of guys that play second or third line, night in, night out, maybe fourth line, guys who you could see a world where you trade, but they're just everyday NHL players. There's the maybes group, which is just a very wide cast net of guys that have a lot of upside, but maybe low likelihood of getting there, or low upside, and maybe there's work to be done, but there's a potential road forward in the NHL. And then we go down to everybody else, which is essentially everybody else, where, I don't know, anything is possible, but they just don't seem to have the statistical track on the way to the NHL. So I hope that explains things as we get into the video, and let's dig into these prospects for the absolutely entertaining Carolina Hurricanes. For a team that has been to the conference finals so many times, they have well over 35 names in my database, which is really high considering what other contending teams tend to have, and that's a testament to their asset management. At the very top, though, in the core category, we have two names. To me, Gleb Trikozov deserves his spot still there. You might look at his Russian second division data from last year and be a little bit questionable, but that team could not score a goal to save their life unless Gleb Trikozov was on the ice. I found his KHL tape a little bit disconcerting, but he's still very young and there's a long developmental track ahead, and he did just come over to North America and we'll see how he does. The other name in here is Alexander Nikishin, who I've always been a pretty decent fan of, but he has surpassed my expectations. I remember the really big, fluid skating defensive defenseman with Spartak Moscow a few years ago, and he's really blossomed into a really effective two-way player. I still do wonder about how much of his high-end KHL offense is going to project to the NHL, but at the end of the day, he's just a rock-solid defenseman, and eventually when he does come over, I think the Carolina Hurricanes are going to have a good one. Moving down the roster in the depth categories, we have tons of fun here. Guys like Scott Morrow and Jaden Perron, first round pick from last year, Bradley Nadeau. We've got Dominic Badinka, second round draft pick from this year, who I am a huge fan of, and I know Carolina really likes him too. After a successful season in Sweden this year, Felix Unger-Sorum earned himself a promotion from the maybes category into the depth category as well. Nikita Artemonov is a guy who I could see playing in the bottom six of an NHL team night in and night out and being pretty solid. We got my boy Timur Mukhanov in here, who I thought had a pretty good season with Sharapovets in the KHL this year, and I'm looking forward to seeing him take another step forward this year. Just a really exciting, fun, aggressive player that I would happily put in my lineup almost anywhere. And Alex Rykov had a really great season in the Chelyabinsk program as well over in Russia. It just seems like the Carolina Hurricanes have just stockpiled really talented Russians and gone, well, some of these probably will work out and other people don't seem to want to draft them, so screw it, let's take a chance on all of them. Moving down the pyramid a little bit, we get to the maybes category, and this is a really wide one. Again, we go back to Russia. Guys like Vladimir Gradinin are in here, Alexander Pashin. We've got Alexander Syryatsky, who they just drafted this year, who I became a pretty big fan of over the course of this season, as well as the other Russian players they drafted this season in Fyodor Avramov, Roman Shokrin, Timur Kol. I did struggle a little bit with Avramov. I do think that there's maybe a little more likelihood than a maybe category here that he does play down the lineup in the NHL, but I think there are some things that need to improve in his game with regards to his pace and consistency with how much he pushes things offensively. He can kind of come and go a little bit, and that might not fly in the depth role of an NHL team. We've got guys like Justin Robidaw, who are a pretty high ceiling but really low floor type player. Same thing with a Jackson Blake and a Noel Franzen. There's just a lot going on in here that really runs the gamut and really just goes to show how good the Carolina Hurricanes have been at just drafting high upside players and really just sending risk out the window and seeing what happens, and I admire it. To close out the maybe category, goaltender Yegor Vemelkin is a guy who I've really enjoyed watching over the past season, and in the everyone else category, there's just a lot of guys in here. Guys like Zion Neubeck, who I always felt was a long shot. Guys like Alexander Pelevin, who I've always been a fan of, but just hasn't really taken positive steps. Noel Gunler has worked his way down here because he just hasn't really taken the steps he needed to take since he got drafted. They just signed Charles Alexis Legault to an entry-level contract, and they seem to be fans of him, so we'll see what happens, but I haven't really seen it with him, and he ends up down here. Bryce Montgomery is another one who hasn't quite come along as expected, but all is not lost on him either. Again, down here at the bottom, it doesn't mean these players are never going to play in the NHL. It's just that when I see them and look at the data, it just feels like they're much further down on the depth chart and they're going to need to put in a lot of work to move their way up. But it's not impossible, so we'll see what happens. So that's it for the Carolina Hurricanes. If you liked the video, give it a like and subscribe. If you really liked it, go to Scouching.ca, where a subscription will get you access to exclusive data tables, early access to content, exclusive written content as well up there, access to a really cool Discord server where we talk hockey and prospects and plenty of other stuff, so you can check all of that stuff out over at Scouching.ca. So that closes out the Carolina Hurricanes, and up next we're going to be looking at the Calgary Flames, so stay tuned for that.